Thank you, everyone. Please welcome Jason Handley from Duke Energy, General Manager of Distributed Energy Group, and Ryan Gerbrandt from Anterix, Chief Operating Officer. Thank you for joining me. So I'll just get to it right away, and starting with you, Jason. In your tenure at Duke, your work has focused on emerging tech and distributed energy. Would you comment on how they connect, and especially as utilities strive for net zero?
Well, sure. First of all, let me thank ETS for the opportunity to come out here and be a part of the program again. I think Jason and the Z-Prime team do a fabulous job every year. I have led, in the past, I recently changed jobs, but I led our emerging technology office for 7 years at Duke Energy. And one of the main things that we tried to do through looking at newer technologies, especially, was how are we going to integrate more greener renewable resources. And so looking at the tie between technology and distributed energy resources, there's a few things that you really have to look at. You have to understand where the cost curves are going to be for making the decisions that you have to make of when is the right times to pull the trigger on some of these technologies. Also, one of the things that we really want to do is create a really solid base of groups that we work with. So whether that be individual manufacturers, or whether that be universities, or federal government, ARPA-E, there is a large mouth. We think about it like a funnel. There's a large mouth to a funnel on our left-hand side, and that's all of our inputs. And really how you start to try and tie where are the right places to start looking for technologies. One of the things that we are doing right now as we are moving towards a zero carbon future, we have specific goals around 2030, 70% reductions, and 2050 of zero, net carbon zero, is how are we going to integrate distributed energy resources into the grid to make them seamless? And do we have all of the tools that we need right now to actually get to those goals? Our CEO has been very vocal about we will make it there, but she's also been very vocal to say that we don't know exactly how we're going to get there yet. And so things are going to have to mature. Technologies are going to have to mature. So there's a very big tie right now between emerging technologies and the ability to green the grid. Things like small modular nuclear reactors, things like getting cost curves down on long-term energy storage. Offshore wind may not seem like a new technology because it's been around, especially in Europe, but for the U.S. and especially off of the East Coast, offshore wind is going to be a big part of this. We just heard Calvin mention the fact that one of the things that's going to be a driver for this is the ability to connect all of these resources via transmission resources. And so having that thought about how you're going to do that in an economical manner is one of the things that's really going to push which technologies are going to be really seen as game-changing and which technologies are not going to be able to be cost economic in the early.
Great. Ryan, I want to hear from you as well, the connection between emerging technology and distributed energy. How from your perspective, how would you describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic having the opportunity to sit up here with folks like Jason, who are absolutely demonstrating the thought leadership necessary on the utility side to really help precipitate and drive the understanding of some of the dynamics of this change. Part of it, when I think about it, just participating in the last couple of days of conversations, when we think about what's the impetus for change, what's driving us to pursue innovation, to accelerate innovation, take risk, be agile, put systems in place to really demonstrate experience. It's all of these different scenarios that we've heard about from thought leaders sitting up on the stage for the last couple of days. It's been just remarkable to think about it, in the full package of what we have in front of us, as a utility industry, and frankly, just the unprecedented change, that I see in front of us. On one side, it's a little scary, I'll be honest, being in this industry now for over 20 years. But at the same time, it's exciting. It's a super exciting time to be in this industry. It's an exciting time to be able to be an innovator and a leader in terms of how we think about approaching that change. But beyond that, I just love some of the remarks that Calvin just said. There's a statement one of my colleagues made that I just absolutely love. The idea of, we need to do better, better in the way that we approach technology evolution, better in the way that we're dealing with incorporation of renewables and adding resiliency and all those features to the grid. But there's a social contract now that we have to do good while we're delivering these services and we're driving these innovations. And that comes back to the way that we think about technology evolution and innovation, ensuring we're continuing to strive for affordability and equity, in every single aspect of how we approach the technology solution. There's very few problems out there that you couldn't throw enough money at, that you could probably address in the right amount of time with the right amount of people, but we just can't think about it that way anymore. We need to find synergies and find commonalities across these solutions. Jason referenced, in the concept of renewables and the integrations as one of the core Duke strategies is these sound foundations, being able to build innovation, and drive adoptions of solutions, that are built on these sound foundations. I couldn't agree more, with that philosophy. We've had the opportunity to be out in the market as, a leading telecom provider, really unlocking some of these capabilities and helping to realize where some of these foundational elements can exist when we start thinking about the forward, actually even the current applications that we see in a modern grid. And one of those core foundations that I think we're starting to realize being unlocked through some new technology that's coming available to the utility space is what I describe really as the digital foundation. Every application, it's almost regardless of what kind of domain area in the utility space that we're talking about today, is inherently today connected. It's connected, it's transparent, it demands your real-time access and information to that set of technology. And, our legacy has taught us in that space, to really learn some lessons through what had been an incremental build process. We were approaching problems, really in silos, and each of those individual problems had a solution, and we adopted solutions as the business cases would drive us forward on those individual applications. But we need to think about that differently. There was impacts there in terms of scalability and portability and the lifecycle management. And I would even go so far as to say it crosses over into the affordability side of things. But by having sound, well-rooted digital foundations, we can now unlock, more of this innovation cycle built on standardization, opening it up to organizations. I was thrilled to hear some of the, the startup pitches this morning, where some of the real bleeding edge thought leaders are in the space. I want to make their life easier. I want to be able to help be a supporter to bring those solutions to market, to service customers like Jason faster than what we've ever seen before. And part of that's about putting these systems in place. They can't have to go through the same kind of integration and testing and kind of life cycle management that we've seen over the last decades in terms of the evolution process to get some of these new solutions to market, to really capture the urgency that we've got, coming back to Kelvin's message, in the critical time that we're on from the environmental perspective. But that's exciting. It's a fantastic area to be in, and we're super excited to be able to look forward to find ways to be able to help address that problem.
So let me just follow up a little bit on what Ryan said. So one of the things that I think is important as utilities as we continue to move forward is, as Calvin said a minute ago, this is not your father's utility. Obviously, there's not a ton of people that would have thought utilities would have had emerging technology offices in the past. Well, these have now started to become more and more prevalent in especially the larger utilities, but even in some of the smaller ones, because smaller ones can actually move a little faster and be more agile. But really what we've got to do is we've got to figure out how to leverage each other. We're still in a space, for the most part, that is willing to share information with each other. There is no sense that I do a pilot project and keep the results to myself. I need to be sharing that with the SoCal Eds, with the Exelons, with the Southern companies, to ensure that they don't go out and do the same pilot, waste their time and their money, that we can talk about things, we can share our own experiences, and so therefore we can get through the swath of technologies that are coming at us so fast now, because the curve is just amazing. It's rising exponentially, the amount of new technologies we're bringing on the grid. Ryan mentioned the fact that everything's connected. That is absolutely correct. We're not putting anything out now that doesn't have some type of two-way communication back. And the reason for that is the data is becoming so critical for us to actually run the grid.
Great, and we'll expand more on these points that you mentioned, both of you. So Ryan, you mentioned accelerating innovative technologies in the utility space. You kind of touched upon it a little bit, but what problems are we looking to solve? And more importantly, what are the benefits and costs to the utility customers?
Yeah, no, I'll expand a little bit. I did touch on it a little bit, but again, just to start kind of the reflection from kind of what we've heard, all of the threats that are out there, whether we think about these existential threats in terms of environmental impacts, we've heard a little bit about hurricanes, we've heard about wildfires in Colorado, over the last couple of days. Certainly that problem is in existence in the West as well. We've heard about cyber attacks, and the potential risk that we see, not only today highlighted by the war in Ukraine, certainly been an ongoing, threat and a growing threat, I'd argue, probably to our utility community. All of these are, to me, the why. All of these, holistically, when we look at it, are problems that we absolutely have to solve as an industry. But I come back to the timeline because I think it really matters. We don't have decades to figure this out, particularly when I think about the environmental risks or, like the dreaded scenario to me, is that one of these cyber events actually becomes reality. And, I know as a customer, not as a partner in the energy industry, the reality today, we're so dependent on our, quality of supply, and having reliable energy that, frankly, I'm sure we've all, experienced it even more working from home and living from home over the last couple of years, just how dependent we really are on it, how critical it is to our daily lives. And the sheer thought to me, of having kind of a sustained long duration outage, across a large fraction of America, is absolutely a doomsday scenario to me. And, being able to continue to drive protections and awareness, and as Jason said, I think the collaboration across utilities is going to be critical for us to be able to do that. But I really see that as kind of being the fundamentals as, as what's really driving it in terms of where we need to solve these problems.
And Jason, what strategies can be implemented to mitigate the financial impact on the customer? So there are financial impacts, obviously, from the smart grid integration, and what strategies can be implemented to mitigate that while maintaining the same rate of tech integration?
Well, I think that's a very important point. I think we all need to understand is that as we move towards a greener grid and away from what I'm going to call legacy technologies, there is going to be upward pressure on rates. And so minimizing the impact to our customers for that means getting the technologies right up front. So ensuring that we've done the due diligence to go through, and if I'm putting out, I have over 8 million customers. Whatever I do at a pretty large scale. So I've got to be right in that technology. So we also need to look really hard at the way that we're trying to recoup the rate of recovery here. So just in North Carolina, we're now looking at multi-year rate plans. We're looking at performance-based rates. There are many things that we're out there trying to do to help lessen the impact on our customers, the upward pressure on rates that are happening. But as we move away from conventional resources, which have been extremely economical for us and for our customers, to more greener resources that have a little bit higher cost initially, and sometimes in the long term, we're going to have to understand that we're going to have to find strategies to slow the rate of impact for the customer, as well as potentially offset some of that by having them either produce some of their own energy, participate in programs that we come up with, behind the meter programs, so that's going to allow them access to potentially energy storage, solar, demand response, energy efficiency, the things that our customers are going to need in the future connected to the newer technologies, and making it more and more seamless for them. Because if you know the way I know, customers, we tried home energy managers for a while, and we gave our customers some devices. As soon as the batteries failed, they put it in a drawer. So we're not these things have to be seamless. They have to be set and forget type practices. And that's going to be the big things that we're looking for now from a technology perspective, is how to integrate from an app on an iPhone or a Samsung device, something to make it convenient and easy for our customers, because the more that they have to work to find either savings or do more to manage their energy, we're not seeing the appetite for that right now.
And Ryan, obviously data is a very big part of tech and smart grid integration. And so how can it be used to achieve control and visibility and combine innovation and distributed energy at the same time? So essentially, how is data used as an asset in this process?
Excellent. Yeah, no, perfectly logical question about where kind of the conversation of connectivity and enablement that we've been talking about goes next. I mean, you think about it at the heart, data is kind of the basis element of all the applications and digitization that we talk about. We're digitizing and we're connecting assets so we can extract the information and the data so we can make decisions on what that information means to us. It drives insight. It helps provide information for planning, and advanced forecasting about where we need to go with the grid, or in the perspective of renewable integrations, kind of what kind of capacity we can manage of what type of renewable in any given environment. And ultimately it pushes us forward with decision making. So I truly put it at the heart of kind of everything when I think about grid modernization. Specifically, as I think about renewables, and distributed energy resources in particular, which I know is part of Jason's passion. I think we got to truly appreciate, just the change that's going to drive in the overall grid operation. The dynamic nature of having, a distributed asset base out there across, the large kind of footprint of an operating utility, and the corresponding impact to all the energy flows and the energy management. Like the conversation earlier around vehicle electrification, was an extreme example of that. In terms of being effectively able to manage that, both the load side and the capacity side, depending on which state it's in, creates a dramatically different challenge in terms of the types of information that we're going to need and the relevance and importance that's going to live on that data, in terms of how we drive innovation and the ability to do that successfully. And I think it's ripe ground for future innovations as well. Just as the history has taught us, I'd say we're at the very early days in terms of really understanding what the true value can be of these massive amounts of data that we've been collecting as an industry. And the ability to drive innovation and unlock capabilities on top of that, I really see as kind of the incremental, growth areas that we ultimately have as an industry. But I'd also say, just based on our recent histories with data, it's taught us some pretty important lessons as well. Data, can be dirty, it can be difficult, it can be hard to really correlate, and I think taking that lesson learned, those experience from some of our early, data experiences and analytics applications and stuff like that can help us think smarter, about how do we architect the data fabric, that lives on top of these digital platforms to help make people's lives, like Jason's, easier, right, in terms of how do I bring in more support, and drive innovation and value out of this data. You shouldn't have to do, kind of a whole level of cleansing and filtering and ultimately pre-work with the data to get to that point. Again, we kind of heard some of that this morning on some of the startup pitch, presentations, which brought back a lot of memories I had of some of the early data analytics projects and stuff that we had, because I truly believe there's honesty in, kind of the statement that it's, the new oil, is really data. We just got to figure out how to make it more usable and then drive the entire innovation work stream around it, as we're building kind of the core infrastructure and the data sets that we're investing in today.
And Ron's exactly right. I mean, data is the what. The how is the comm system. So in order to facilitate that data, we have to be investing in our enterprise communication systems. So data is great, but you got to have it at the right place at the right time, because otherwise, it's not as valuable. And so we are really trying to look at our baseline enterprise communication systems to determine what data is important to us and where it is. So looking at do we do on-prem or off-prem? Do we do a cloud structure? Are we looking at doing more of distributed intelligence, pushing the decision-making back to the edge to where we don't have to transport the data as far, making multiple decision points? We're always going to have high-end hierarchy systems. We're always going to have OMSs, DMSs, SCADA systems, things like that. But we need to start pushing the decisions further and further down, substation level, feeder level, nodal level, premise level at the home. These are where we're going to be able to save a lot of, hopefully, kilowatt hours for our customers in the future.
Yeah, I just want to come back to one point too that he made. He just reminded me, kind of the collective voice of the industry. I think it's such an empowering message, as Jason hit on before, and it's really unique to this space. The ability and the willingness of utilities to drive collaboration and have this open conversation. I think it helps in so many different ways, and it reminded me kind of when I think about the data, the intelligence, and the learning side. What's unique about the scenario when I think about environmental challenges, when I think about renewable integration, when I think about electrification of transportation, that's not unique to one utility, right? We're facing that as a nation. And in fact, we're facing that as a global economy, where there's experiences and lessons being learned, in all different places of the world. But coming back just to the U.S. for a minute, the lessons learned that Jason may have in Duke Energy are completely applicable to Kelvin and Exelon service territory or any other of the utilities. And I think our ability to capture that information, and to normalize, I'll come back to the data part that you were asking, how about, that we can apply those lessons learned in a way in Duke's operating territory, but then take the algorithm that Jason may innovate on and apply it to all of the other utilities because there's a foundation of common systems, and common information standards, and standards products and services, helps us accelerate innovation at a much more scalable level. We're seeing a lot of the innovation in the R&D cycles now happen within individual utilities. And I'd say we're a little bit at the early days still in terms of how effective we can be, to be able to gather that lesson learned and that experience and be able to roll it all out. I'd argue there's an economic benefit that comes with that scale too. I think there's an economic benefit in terms of savings, some of the repeated R&D costs and the exploration. But same thing goes, so comes economic advantage when you have scale and volume, and by being able to adopt and embrace systems, at a much larger nationwide scale, helps put more power, in terms of how we drive and influence the whole supply chain end to end. And I think we have to think about problems like that, if we're truly going to manage the complexities of how to keep rates affordable, as Jason said, and be able to deploy these kinds of technologies in a truly equitable way, which means we're going to push it into some areas where, the economics would say, you're starting to cross the line, but we have to do it. It's the way that we got to think about the bigger picture, of the economic TCO, that makes it work for all of our service territories and all of our utility constituents.
Great. And we can't talk about data and digital integration without mentioning cybersecurity, which you mentioned earlier. And as Calvin Butler said earlier, cybersecurity is a hot topic. And as you've all heard, it's been mentioned in so many of our talks in the past couple of days by our speakers. So how should utilities go about addressing this threat and risk, and how can emerging tech companies help? I want to start with your perspective, Ryan.
Yeah, happy to. No, you're absolutely right. You cannot have a conversation today, whether it's about communications or digitization and connectivity. The elephant in the room, I'll acknowledge it. When we talk about, kind of all this proliferation of digitization and more connected devices, it's the opposite, frankly, of what you want to do, from kind of securing your boundaries and being able to protect yourself from a cyber perspective. But it's a necessary step, and the way that we really need to think about it, is absolutely back to kind of the foundational elements. We're building some critical digital systems across the U.S. today, and a lot of those vulnerabilities and our ability to protect them live in the way that we architect and we develop. Security by design, is really the philosophy now of being able to build it in from the onset, put the right pieces in, understand your vulnerabilities and your threats, being able to protect your borders. The scenario is daunting. When I think about our problem that we're trying to solve, with cyber, we need to be right as an industry in protecting our borders thousands, if not tens of thousands times a day. Is kind of how routine these threats and these intrusion potentials are. The enemies, I'll call them, need to be right once, and they're in. And, it's a scary way to think about the problem, but it's a good way to highlight, I think, the criticality and the importance of how we really need to address it. Now, from an innovation perspective, one thing that we've really been looking at, trying to bring scale, and ultimately drive value back into the industry. There's no silver bullet to this problem. There's no single solution or technology or vendor that we're going to be able to look at across the whole industry and say, aha, I've got it. That's the answer to cybersecurity. It just doesn't work that way. And there's a lot of fantastic, innovative companies out there, but it's challenging, I think, to really deal with the volume, of all the different opportunities and the different types of solutions, and then mold it back, as Jason said, kind of into a real foundational architecture of technology where you can put all the pieces together. we're trying to help with that process for the industry. We've catered something that we've called our Cybersecurity Collective, which was purpose-built to be able to help us do that early evaluation. I'm not a cyber expert. I've been in the room with the cyber experts, and I have no idea what they're talking about half the time, but I know, it's extremely important work, about the pieces that they're trying to solve. And so I kind of put it back into the, idea that we were talking about earlier, the ability to drive collaboration, to drive the collective interests across all the nation's utilities, learn from each other, and use that voice to try to drive empowerment and conversations back to the right appropriate levels within government, to share information, get threat indexes about what's really going on out there in the world, and put it all in, because it's absolutely foundational in every conversation we're having with utilities across the nation on their pursuit of digitization and connectivity.
Yeah, a couple of great points by Ryan. And for us, the threat vectors are changing daily. So the more devices I said that we put in, everything that's going in with some type of two-way communication, that is a new threat vector. That is a new place that we can be hacked. And so we're having to move our architecture from security by obscurity to defense in depth, and really having to move from thinking about security solutions as a bolt-on solution to an existing system to foundational. If you are not building your systems in foundationally with security at the very base, you're probably headed in the wrong direction right now. And so one of the things Duke has started to do is we have decided that we are building it in foundationally, and one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to push that defense boundary from the firewall at the data centers all the way out to the grid edge. And we're going to actually make the distributed equipment that we have out there more and more intelligent. So putting chips that are programmable to do certain cyber functions out at the grid edge, which is going to allow it a little bit more security around who is actually able to speak to this equipment and get on our network. So there are definitely things, you may have heard the term whitelisting. We whitelist a lot of our equipment. It says if you're not already on this list, if an IP jumps up, you're not able to talk, you're not able to communicate, you're not able to say anything. Moving that from getting all the way back to the firewall at our data centers to the grid edge is really helping us ensure that we don't have cyber issues all the way back into the network.
Thank you. This is great. I think we don't have enough time for questions, so I want to end with any final remarks or advice from both of you regarding embracing emerging technologies.
Go ahead.
Sure. So the first thing is the technology adoption rate that we're going to see in the next 20 years is probably greater than what we've seen in the past 50 years. So you have to be ready for it, which means that you have to set your organizations up to be successful. And by doing that, number one, the first thing you need to do is have a structure to where you can gain feedback from the best resources you have, which is your employees. Your teammates have some of the most innovative ideas of how to fix problems that we already know are out there. Duke Energy has taken that to the next level. We've implemented our own technology solutions team. Besides an emerging technology team, a technology solutions team, and an innovation team, to where all employees have a website that they can go to and submit innovation ideas. Those innovation ideas come to an IP team, and they are actually looked at to take forward for patents. Because here's the other thing. With the patent law that changed in 2013, it's very important now for you to protect your IP. So that's not necessarily meaning that you're going to go out and you're going to produce a new widget. It means you're just not going to be allowed, nobody's going to tell you can't go do it. So the patent law changed from first to produce the device to first to patent the idea. And so what we've seen in the industry is there's a lot of folks trying to patent the ideas to keep utilities and other folks from playing in that area. So I would say number one, use your people. And number two, invest in some type of IP type committee to really ensure that you're capturing the most that you can.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I couldn't agree more. We're at such an exciting time. When I think about kind of being a technologist, engineer in this space, I just couldn't be more passionate about kind of the opportunities to help identify and work with partners like Jason and be able to bring these solutions to the market. We're going to do a lot, and we're going to do good as we're working our way through it. And I think it's going to be a super exciting time. Ultimately, the one thing I've learned, that I'll say that I'll kind of depart. We definitely focus, I feel like, a lot on new things, new silver bullets. We're kind of looking for that ultimate fix to all of the problems. But not everything, I'll say, that will be transformational is necessarily new. There's a lot of systems that are out there. There's a lot of great tech that are out there. I know a lot of fantastic companies and solution providers, that have just ideal solutions to a lot of the challenges. I'd also say I challenge us to look across industries. It's one thing I've realized, coming into joining with Anterix, the lack of ability that we had as a utility industry to really tap into the capabilities that the telecom industry had been building for decades. I didn't truly identify until I got onto this side of the, of the aisle. And we've been able to tap into those lessons learned and experiences and technologies, and just a whole new industry of capabilities that has an absolute relevance back into the electric utility industry. And I'm sure we'll find that in other sectors as well, where we can steer across their R&D, their lessons learned, and it'll only help us go faster and think more creatively about how we solve some of the problems in our space today.
Well, I think this concludes our discussion today. This was wonderful. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Jason. Thank you.
All right, give it up for our fireside chat.